guys today?
Good.
That's good. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about some of the basics of livestock judging. Coming from the University of Missouri, they say that we need to understand a visible image of what good livestock should look like. So since livestock judging is such a hard event in 4-H and FFA, today I'm going to show you the basics of how it's done and what we look for when we start to look at livestock. So first off, we're going to start with cattle. We really can't see that very well, but you should be able to get a general picture. So first off, we're going to start off with market cattle. With market cattle, we look at muscle, carcass traits, and functionality. Now, in cattle, as the basics of livestock judging PowerPoint states, first you want to look and see how their body is made. You want them to be balanced. So when we talk about balance, we want to make sure that it's an equal proportion from in front of this triangle area. So in front of the head, with the head and shoulders and part of the back, and its hip back into its hind leg. We want to make sure that's even, because an animal that's not balanced will walk very weird, and you'll start to notice it as it walks, and it'll kind of start to lean forward and have troubles walking. Now when we look at muscle, we want to get over their top. With us, we look at muscle in our forearm, and that's where we look at in cattle. But we also want to look at it in our back muscles and their back muscles. But we don't look for muscle in our backs, because if we lift with our backs, we're not going to be able to lift very much. But how wide the steer is determines how much muscle they can have, because the wider their back, that means the wider their chest, and with the wider chest means they have more shoulder and forearm there to bulk themselves up. But that's almost the complete opposite when we start to think about breeding cattle. Breeding cattle are a whole different breed. They're based off of functionality and soundness. You don't want a breeding heifer or a bull. We'll talk about breeding heifers though. You don't want a breeding heifer super pulled apart and unfunctional. You want those heifers to be able to last long and be able to carry a calf while still being capacious enough to have the depth of body to pack on food to be able to produce milk for that calf. Now, as we start to look at cattle though, we still focus on balance and structure in the heifers. This heifer right here, as we can see, is a pretty good heifer, but when we're looking at it, it's still balanced, it still looks functional, and it's deep body. So now we're going to go on to what we look for when we judge a sheep. So this is actually me showing a sheep. This sheep is a fairly good representation of both market and breeding traits of what we're looking for. So when we look at market traits, we want them to have sort of a doorstop shape, ranging like a slice of cheddar. We want them to start out shallow chested and go that big and deep back into their hip and hind leg. As we can see, this sheep is running uphill. We want to look at them and make sure this part of their shoulder is higher than their dock. And now that we're starting to talk about the dock, we want to make sure it's not too rounded out of there. When we're talking about dock, we're talking about their hip or their butt practically. We want them to come out at kind of an angle. We don't want them to be super round out of there, because once they start getting round, that means they're starting to deposit more fat back there. And when we look at the shoulder, we want to make sure it's not too bulked up of a shoulder. We want to make sure it goes smooth back into its body. And when we look at a sheep over the top, we want them to be wide-loined and square-made and hard handling. And what I mean by hard handling is not like handling this table. It's how they feel, how the freshness applies in there. But you want to make sure they're firm to the touch. And if they're firm to the touch, that means they don't have too much fat. So that's what we're looking for in a sheep. In breeding sheep, it's pretty much the same principles. You look for functionality and how they look. You always want them running uphill. You don't want their neck connecting too low. Like sometimes you'll see a neck that'll kind of connect down here, and that's not good because that means their shoulder and their head and neck drop lower into their skeleton. Now when we look at pigs, right now people are looking for muscle and functionality and wanting them to move. They want them to power through and run like a sprinter, but also have enough muscle like a bodybuilder. So this pig is actually a fairly good representation. It's a little short body, but we can start to see this crease down the middle of its back, and that's how you can see muscle. Because on pigs, it's not, you don't handle a pig. You look for their muscle, and you kind of want them to have more of a ditch down their back, like a nice trench after their blade. When we're talking about their blade, we're talking about their shoulder, which is about right here and back. We want them to have a ditch all the way back, and that's how we know that they have muscle. And when we talk about functionality, we want to think about their feet. This one's feet are high enough off of its pasterns it's not coming down. And when I'm talking about pasterns, it's the two little, so if we're looking at a pig and its right bice, we're looking for the dew claws right here. Now, when you're looking at a pig, you judge them from the ground up. Because if their dew claws start to come down, you know they're going to have some structural issues, and you know they're not going to be able to put on a lot of weight after that. With pigs, once you start looking at that structural stuff, you want to look at their muscle, how wide they are, how heavy muscle they are, how square built they are. When I talk about square built, you want to look at them from their front feet to their back feet. You want to make sure they're straight, square built. They're straight and square built, but you also don't want them too straight along. You don't want them too straight along the lines of their legs to where they can't move and they just kind of limp out. Also on a pig, you want to look and see how cleaned up they are through their jowline. You don't want them fat or with a double chin. You want them nice and cleaned up throughout there. You want them with a rugged head. You want them to look like market hogs. You want them to look kind of mean. And that's how you know they're muscly. And that's pretty much how to judge a pig, how to judge a sheep, and how to judge cattle. Now, as we start to conclude today, we've talked about cattle, sheep, and pigs, and how to judge them. It is relatively hard, but you have to get that mental picture first of what a good piece of livestock should look like, and hopefully this is kind of a good illustration for you. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you.